Mentioned that between Buffalo and Bowling Green, it was either Route 5 or Route 20, which was around 300 miles. It took 6, 7, 8 hours because we had to go through every small town between here and there. All kinds of stoplights, all kinds of stopping. And would probably put in a quart of oil every 100 miles, somewhere in that vicinity. Before I got the car, I do remember hitchhiking home in the middle of winter one time with a student from the Buffalo area, Tony Santamora. He and I hitchhiked home in the dead of winter. We stood out there and took us off while we waited for the next pickup, but we got home. Tony's family owned a bar and restaurant right across on Eggert Road, across from the mall. I can't recall right now what else is there, but it was right across from the mall on Eggert Road, and we used to visit there often. Tony went on after he graduated from Bowling Green to UP's medical school, graduated, and I used to see him fairly often over at Kenmore Mercy. I think he was involved once, maybe with Mom's back. I can't recall what his specialty was, but I know he was involved, and he and I used to just checking the status. After that first year, in the beginning of the second year, and switched to business administration, what a joy it was, as opposed to the first year where I did nothing but struggle. But in the second year, going into business administration and majoring, ironically, in insurance and marketing, was really a joy. I get confused as to who I worked for when during the summers, but one year I worked at General Motors, as I mentioned. Another year I worked for the town of Tonawanda sewer department, and it was they had a building over on 2 Mile Creek Road, over the top of what is now the 290 on the other side, and that was an experience in working for a municipality, because we'd get there early in the morning at 7 o'clock or so, and we'd load up the truck, and we had a designated spot to go to where some sewer was plugged. We would very casually and slowly drive from here to there, but before we got there, we had to stop and have a coffee break, which was supposed to be 5 or 10 minutes, but often extended to 15 or 20. I do recall one time there was a motel at the corner of Niagara Falls Boulevard and Koenig Road, and it must have been a spot where people, men and women, would rent the room, not for overnight, but just for an hour or two. And the sewer outside their building was pretty well plugged, and we ran the auger down through, well, let me tell you, I have never seen as many rubbers in my entire life as what came pouring down once we ran the auger through and ran water through to clear whatever it was that was holding the passage of sewage up. We'd work a little bit out on the job, and then we'd pack all the stuff up. Wouldn't leave it there, but pack it all up and drive about 15 or 20 miles an hour back to our station, and made sure we got there right at 12, because we only had a half an hour for lunch. But we got there, I think they took circuitous routes in order to get us there at exactly 12. And of course then we'd start up again at 12:30 and take another very slow, meandering drive to our next location. I don't think we did more than one clearing in the morning, one clearing in the afternoon, but that gave me an idea of how municipal workers work. And we'd many times eat a sandwich from our packed bag. It only took about 3 minutes because the rest of the half an hour was used playing euchre. And that's where I first learned how to play euchre, and I haven't played it again until this past winter down in Florida. But things did seem to come back a little bit. But it was an enjoyable game, and the guys that worked for the town sewer department really loved it. I think it was during that second year back, either second or third, I can't recall, when through ROTC I met Phil Getzman and Bob Conshafter, both from Amherst, and there was another man, Wick Brundage. He was on the Amherst swimming team, and I think I met him first through swimming and then at Bowling Green. Both Phil and Bob became clients of mine because of our relationship at school, and it lasted for a long, long time. I think Mom and I were both, Betty Jane and I were both godparents for either Michael and or Philip Jr., godparents. And I think one time when we flew out for a convention out at the Broadmoor, Phil was stationed out there in Colorado, so he met us and picked us up, and we had dinner. And we subsequently, after we had graduated, we met at various locations, I think at Fort Sill and over in Japan or Korea, because we both entered the service about the same time, so our paths would cross on occasions. Going back to my mother's plan for me and working and keeping busy when I wasn't studying, and I didn't do a hell of a lot of that. There was a gas station right near the fraternity house, and I worked there for a while. I also, I think it was my junior or senior year, I think it was during my senior year, before I met Mom, that I even went up to Toledo and got a job working on the second shift at the Willys Jeep plant in Toledo. That was short-lived, but it gave me a couple nickels in my pocket. And of course I had the car, so I could get up there and back. Probably got up there at 4 o'clock and got through at midnight, and arranged my schedule so I didn't have too many 8 o'clock classes the next morning. Being in the center of farm country there at Bowling Green, tomatoes were raised big time in that area, and right in the center of Bowling Green and right near the college was one of Heinz's, no, I don't like to use that word, one of Heinz's ketchup plants. So they'd have truckload after truckload in the fall that would bring tomatoes from the farm community into the plant, and they'd line up and they'd dump their tomatoes. And, well, if you've ever smelled tomatoes cooking, you'd never forget the smell. Whether the plant is still there or still functioning, I don't have any idea. You remember, boys, when we'd go down south, you remember the smell that came from the paper plant near Georgetown, and when the wind was just right, why we could smell them cooking up the pine trees and making paper there in Georgetown. But this smell was equally offensive. I never got a job in the tomato plant, understandably. I think it was in my junior and senior year, living in the fraternity house. Nobody else seemed to want to, and so I applied for and got the position of house manager. Now that paid for my room and board, which was a relief, I'm sure, to the folks. And maybe it was because I got that job that the folks got me the car, because I needed the car to go down to the local wholesale house and buy those great big cans of green beans and tomatoes and corn and whatever the cook was planning for our dinner. So I would pick up these items at the wholesale house, bring them back to the house, and the cook would prepare dinner along with some kind of an entree. It was my job to wallop the pots and pans and put the dishes in the dishwasher afterwards. So I had it wasn't a full-time job, but it helped pay for a lot of my college costs. While I was at the wholesale house, I would see boxes, maybe 24, 24 in a box of Heath bars and Hershey bars and all kinds of candy and gum and things along that line that the fellows would buy from me. I had a dresser, and being boys, I hated I knew what would happen if I just left the items in the drawer. So what I did was get a clasp and a lock, either with a key or a combination lock, and put my stuff in the drawer. And I think I sold it for the same price that you'd buy it in a store, probably a nickel. And I probably bought it for 4 or 4.5 cents or something like that. So I made a couple nickels that way. I also bought and had available prophylactics for whatever they used those for. And it wasn't so much that I made a lot of money on it, but it was a convenience for the guys in the house. The fraternity house was there was a room on the back for the house mother, who watched over us, had dinner with us, and people that had problems could go and talk to her. She was a lady who, in fact, when Mom and I got married, she was the one that painted the picture of the place we got married, which was the Episcopal Church right there on the campus. It's a little distorted, and Mom never cared for it too much because it kind of tilted off to the one side or the other, but she was obviously an amateur painter. First floor was a living room. Whoops, be back in a minute. Yeah, it was a big house, not dissimilar from the old house down in McClellanville. Great big porch all the way around the front with pillars, and as I say, the living room, great big living room, TV set. That's where we used to have our meetings. Kind of a circular or half circular stairway to the second floor, where we had our study rooms and clothes. Great big kitchen, great big dining room with long tables on them, where we used to eat dinner and breakfast. Oh, I not only was the house manager and got that sort of thing, but I also cooked breakfast for the guys in the morning. So I had to get up fairly early, whatever kind of eggs they wanted, whether it was scrambled or over easy and toast. So I not only cooked their breakfast, but I also cleaned up, put all the dishes and washed them all partially and put them in the, I'm pretty sure we had a dishwasher. I can't recall now whether we did or didn't. A great big stove with a grill, so I could make pancakes, or I don't think I got into the waffle thing, but eggs or pancakes was the fare in the morning. And then, as I say, an addition that we put on the back of the house, which was a bedroom, living room, and bathroom for the house mother. I can't remember her name right now, but she was a retired lady, widow, and I can't remember what we paid her, but she got room and board and her meals, and a room of her own. The third floor, which was enormous because it was a pretty darn good-sized house, was a dormitory, and it had beds and cots and no doubles because of the slanting roof, but people had their own bed. I don't think I sent my sheets home too often, and many times I was sleeping just on a mattress because the sheets had all, from my tossing and turning, rolled in a long, the length of the bed. And I always meant when I get up in the morning to go up and make the bed, but I never got around to it until it was time to go to bed. And when I got up there, it was not, because everything was dark, but you knew where your bed was, so hopefully you didn't stumble over somebody else and wake them up, because the beds were all around the outside of the room. There was a driveway and a parking lot in the back, because like so many homes, there was an alley separating running down between the backs of the houses, and we had a parking lot back there for those that had cars. There were, I'm sure, like your colleges, groups that came in. I remember one time Billy May came in, and he played in the auditorium where they played basketball. They didn't have an auditorium per se, or maybe one that wasn't big enough to hold the orchestra and have room to dance. And many other big band groups would come and play as part of the fees that we paid for social functions. I think it was in 1951, 48, 49, I think I was a junior, and I met a young lady who was a senior. Yes, she was a senior, I was a junior. Jan Dunstan, and she was a brilliant student, and I kind of sidled up to her, and we went to dances and parties and the like. She was such a good student that she was forever in the library, which was kind of a foreign place to me, but if I wanted to see her or be with her in the evening, I had to meet her at the library. Well, if you're going to meet somebody in the library, you got to do something. So I took my books along, and while we were sitting there and occasionally touching or talking, I had to study. Well, it was during maybe my first semester or second semester or both semesters that, because of the studying that I had to do to be near Jan, my grades increased. In fact, it was the best year of my college career was when I was a junior and had to meet Jan at the library and study. That tells you something. Because I had wheels, on occasions, she was from Chillicothe, Ohio, down south, southern Ohio. And sometimes on the weekends, we'd just go to her house. And let's see, Chillicothe is famous for Indians, mound Indians, as I recall. There were still mounds that were burial places for Indians. Why that comes to mind, I don't have any idea, but that's what's going through this simple mind. We also, while I was in the fraternity, there was somebody recommended for membership, a man by the name of Jim Shepard, who, because of illness or an accident, was paralyzed from the waist down. He had very, very heavy braces on his legs that had to be unhooked or released at the knees, and he got around campus fairly well. He did join the fraternity and moved into the house. I became almost like my father before me with the man that he worked with at Spencer Kellogg. I became kind of the designated watcher over and transporter of Jim. And I would transport him in the car, and then he'd grab a hold of his crutches, and I'd put him on my back and carry him to basketball games or wherever, whatever function was going on. We did stay in touch, and one time when we were, for whatever reason, maybe it was when we were going to South Carolina, he had gone to Japan and married a girl from Japan. And you may or may not know, Japanese women back then were very much dominated. And he married this Japanese girl, and they had, I think, 2 or 3 boys, and lived in the Washington, Baltimore area. And on one of our trips, we stopped in to see Jim and rehashed old memories. And he, maybe because of his disability, got a job working for the federal government. I've since lost track of where he is or what he's doing. But it was a nice experience, taking care of somebody like that. In the summer of '51, between my junior and senior year, we ROTC students were required to spend a 6-week period at some military base. It happened to be at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Red sand and hot. And Ward and I drove my car down to Fort Bragg, and we were out. The main thing that happened down there, other than the training and the marching and just learning, acclimating ourselves to what the military life was like, we were out in the field, and my old nemesis, Poison Ivy, got a hold of me. Well, I got Poison Ivy, and I really had a dose. I had a dose similar to what I had as a teenager up at Sunset Bay, to a point where they put me in the hospital. So I missed about a week and a half or 2 weeks of the 6-week summer camp in the hospital, and kept begging them. And I said, look, all I have to do is get a shot and this stuff will go away. I can go back and do my thing. No. In the Army, we do the slow cure. You just put calamine lotion on there and stay in bed. And I guess I missed out on a number of things, but in the heat and the red sand that got all over everything, didn't bother me at all. Before I got the Poison Ivy, I had to, for whatever reason, I don't recall, but I had to take public transportation to get from A to B. And I stood there with my nickel or dime or quarter or whatever it was, and got on the bus, and all the seats were full, except for, now this is in 1951, and you got a northern boy who doesn't know the South, other than my scene at the theater's colored entrance and the water fountains with colored only or white only or that type of thing. So being so unfamiliar with it, I got on this bus, and the only seat available was in the back. So I went back and plunked my ass down and I got all kinds of people the white people up in front were turning around looking at me, and the black people were looking at me like, what the hell are you doing back here, fella, Whitey? Nobody ever said anything, but I felt uncomfortable and was happy to get off the bus. But I think that was one of my exposures to segregation down south. After I did get poison ivy, I tried my darndest to, before they put me in the hospital, because I knew what I had, I went to a hospital there in North Carolina, in whatever the name of the town, Lumberton? No. That's another place. Went to a hospital and went in to see in the emergency room and tried to get one of the doctors to give me a shot of this anti-poison ivy thing to get rid of it. Well, another shock occurred because we went in the front of the hospital, Ward and I, and we went to a waiting room that was very comfortable. Big leather chairs and couches and comfortable to sit and wait till you saw the physician, who, by the way, said, "No, you're in the military. I don't give you anything. Get out of here." But all the blacks had entered by the side door, and I think there was 2 or 3 steps up to the main floor. But all these blacks, in whatever injury or sickness that they might have had, were either standing there or sitting, not in any chairs, sitting on the steps, waiting to be called to see the physician. So this was part of my education in segregation that I had never been exposed to before, and so was quite surprised to see it, being as naive as I was for what happened down south. One of my first experiences because I was majoring in both marketing and insurance, the insurance professor made arrangements with a bus company, and we took a tour. We drove from Bowling Green west into Indiana to Fort Wayne, Indiana, because he wanted to expose us and have us see what an insurance company looked like. Well, it happened to be Lincoln Life. I think it's called now Lincoln National, as I see it advertised on television. And the most memorable part of my trip there to Lincoln Life was a machine, as I recall, down in the basement that did nothing but pump out checks. And I'm sure they were claim checks. I'm sure they were dividend checks, premium refunds. But this machine just kept going and going and going. And that's the thing that probably amazed me more than anything else, was a machine that just constantly pumped out checks. That was the thing that I think got my attention more than seeing the rest of the building or the workers, or it was my introduction to the insurance business. And again, my memory is a little foggy, but my good old 1936 Plymouth Coupe was starting to show signs of wear. And I do believe that during the summer between summer of '52, I think Dad or I approached Raymond and said, keep an eye out for another vehicle, because I'll be graduating soon. I'm going to need some wheels. I don't know where I'm going to have to go, but keep an eye out. Well, he found a nice, I think it was a Plymouth again, but it was a sedan. It had been in a wreck, not big time, but I think one of the side doors or something had been plowed in a little bit. And Raymond said, here, get this. This is how much it is, and I can get this for the other car. And so we essentially swapped, I think in 1952. But I had to wait because a friend of his was a collision man who worked during the day for some dealership or whatever, and had another shop of his own that he did work in the evening. Well, he was exhausted. He worked hard during the day, and I kept driving over to see if my car was ready, and it wasn't ready, and I'd go back a week later, and it still wasn't ready, Don, I'll get to it. And so he finally did, and he did a nice job, repaired whatever damage there was to it, and repainted the thing. It was a light tan. It was a nice car. And my recollection was that it was a 1939 Plymouth. Again, remembering that this is early 50s, and no cars were made during the war years from 41 to 45. So I was lucky to get that, not only the 36 but the 39 in the early 50s. And it had low mileage on it, as I recall. But Raymond did a good job for me, keeping me abreast of what I should get in cars. And again, getting back to my work schedule, again through Dad and people that he dealt with, he dealt with a man by the name of Frost. And of course, what other name could he have except Jack? He was probably John Frost, but everybody called him Jack, obviously. Jack Frost. And so Dad was able to secure for me a job working for the Eastern States Milling Company, which was on Military Road, and you guys may recall it because it was those great big concrete silos where the grain would come in. They'd mix it with other ingredients and bag it in burlap bags, and they had a railroad siding right there. And part of my job was to be up in the upper floors where this mixture was put together, and I had to hold the bag very tightly around the chute, and the grain and feed would come down into the bag, and being as young and as inept as I was in comparison to what the other guys knew and how they, just like at Chevy, how do you do this? And so I would end up with more feed around my feet that had to be shoveled up later and put in bags because I mishandled the bag. That was a tough job, but the job that I really enjoyed was when I got into the loading gang, because these bags that were filled in the upper levels would come down chutes after they had been sewed together across the top. They would come down these chutes, and we would stand in a box car at the lower part of the chute, and we would catch these 100-pound bags on our shoulder. You had to get accustomed to doing that one also, because these bags would come down with a fair amount of force. And some of the men that I worked with down there in the loading gang were really in great shape and knew how to handle these bags. Some of them, the size of a boxcar, some of them could stand there in the middle of the car where the chute was and throw that bag to the end of the boxcar. Now these bags had to be piled first one north and south, the next one east and west, and they had to be packed in there fairly tightly. But some of these guys were so strong they could throw this 100-pound bag and have it fall in line with where they wanted it. Utterly amazing. I got to a point where I could handle it also. I don't think I could throw it to the end of the car, but I could throw them pretty well. I was probably in the best shape of my life at that time. And these guys were pretty much, like longshoremen, I guess is the way I could describe them. I think the first day that I got there, I didn't know whether to take my lunch or whether we were going out to eat or whatever have you, and you only had a short period of time. I think we only got a half an hour for lunch. And they said, come on with us. And so, geez, we'd pile in the car and we'd go over across the street on Military Road to a bar where they had roast beef sandwiches and whatever. So I would get a roast beef sandwich and a beer or a Coke or whatever it might be. Well, these guys, their lunch was a shot and a beer and another shot and a beer. They must have had 3 or 4 Boilermakers for lunch and would go back and could perform just as well after lunch as they did before. So they were real husky guys and down-to-earth guys, not the kind of guys that some young lady would want to take home and have introduced to her parents. That was the summer that I made a lot of trips to Cleveland, and I'll get into that in a short period, because coming up next is going to be my introduction to Betty Jane Kelly, and this is going to be a little bit tougher part of my discussion, so bear with me. I did, by the way, when I worked for Eastern States, drove to Cleveland every weekend except one during that summer of '52. And my gracious parents, I'm not sure whether I had the new car at that time, the newer car at that time, or whether I still had the coupe. But God bless Mom and Dad, they let me use their car to drive to Cleveland every weekend, as I say, except one. And I'll get into that later. So I put a ton of miles on theirs. What is it, 150? No, 200 miles to Cleveland, I guess. 150 anyhow. And so I was putting 300 plus miles on their car every weekend during the summer of '52. And the other surprising thing, when you're in love, you do most anything that needs to be done. My job at Eastern States was not 5 days like Chevrolet and the sewer department and whatever else I did, but it was 6 days. So I didn't leave Buffalo until like 5 or 6. Maybe we got off at 4:30 or something like that, and I got home and took a shower and jumped in the car. And this pretty lady was waiting for me on the front steps, because I'd get in about 9 o'clock on Saturday night, and then I had to leave Sunday, 24 hours later, sometime after Grandma Kelly fixed dinner, and then I had to pack up and go home. So I was only in Cleveland for about 24 hours on the weekend, but it was well worth the trip. Now we get to the spring of 1952. We'll back up a little bit here. And you must understand that the fraternity that I belonged to, SAE, at Bowling Green, I think you had to own 4 jock straps or you couldn't belong. It was really all of the renowned football players and basketball players and so on were members of the fraternity. My services were even required because they passed out trophies for touch football, basketball, swimming. That's where my services were required. And at that time I was smoking cigarettes. And I said, oh, geez, I can swim the 100-yard freestyle, because I did that in high school. Well, I liked to dive. I think we won the meet against other fraternities, because it was all interfraternity competition and some independents and groups like that. I don't think we won the trophy for academics, but I think they did include academics to a degree as part of the overall trophy, which I think we won for most of the years that I was there. So it included sports and academics too. And there was also a bicycle race. Well, at that time, the northeast part of the university was, as I said earlier, farmland. And I can't remember what the acreage would have been, but there were paved roads for I think it was over a mile. And they had a interfraternity bicycle race. Well, this bicycle race, the members would line up or sign up, and everybody was required to take at least one run around this. Well, if you're out of shape and smoking cigarettes and have to ride that confounded bicycle around this 1 mile, at least 1 mile square around a cornfield, by the time you got back, you like to die, or I did anyhow. And some of the athletes had to do more than one stunt, because they were obviously in better shape, and we won that. Well, one of my fraternity brothers by the name of Bob Schiffko, whose wedding Mom and I went to many years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years after I got out of the military. We went to Cleveland because he was getting married. But we were at the bicycle race, and the sororities would bring blankets over, and they were each one of the sororities would almost pick out one of the fraternities to help support, and they'd bring lemonade and water and fan the guys when they came off, or tended to their blisters and that type of thing. Well, I said to Bob Schiffko, I said, who is that gorgeous girl sitting over there on the blanket? And I said, do you know her? And he said, oh yes, she's from Cleveland, as I am. And I think they had connected. Well, he said, I'll introduce you to her. And I said, geez, I'd love that. So he brought me over and introduced me to this Betty Jane Kelly. And I was really taken. I noticed that on her sweater or blouse or whatever, because this was in the spring of the year and I think it was still a little bit chilly, I noticed she had a fraternity pin on her blouse or sweater, and it was obvious that she was pinned to some young man there in school. And I subsequently found out his name was Glenn. I can't remember now what his last name is. It doesn't make much difference. But she was pinned to Glenn, and so we introduced and we chatted for a little bit, and I think I said something like, you know, I'd like to give you a call, or maybe we could go for a walk or go to the show or something like that. And she says, I am pinned. And I said, well, that's all right. I don't mind that. I wasn't accustomed to being told no. And that, my sons, is how this better part of my life began, by meeting this pretty young lady and being very, very aggressive, and aggressive to a point where I would just happen to find out what her schedule was, and because I had wheels, I could get wherever I wanted to go as quickly as I wanted to go. And I knew where some of her classes were, and some of them were out at the what we call the Fine Arts Building, which is where the artists and the choirs and whatever that the fine arts had their classrooms. So I would just happen to be there at a time when Betty Jane Kelly was going to walk from the main campus out to the Fine Arts Building. And I just happened to be there, and oh, geez, why don't I walk with you? And so that's where it all started. Well, it wasn't too much longer after that we kind of hit it off. And she was obliged to tell Glenn that she wasn't going to be pinned anymore, and so gave him back his fraternity pin, some other fraternity, I don't know what it was. And we started seeing each other on a regular basis. Now this was in April, I believe it was, April of '52, and there wasn't much more time left in the school year. But we did spend an awful lot of time together between the time